All right. You're going to find a handout on your classroom and questions. This is what we're doing today. It is Industrial Revolution, Women at Work. Okay? So, here we go. Okay? All right, the Industrial Revolution was a major turning point in history. Changed the way of life for everyone. One major change was a shift of the roles for women. For the first time, a large number of women began to work jobs outside of the home. And this newfound independence gave rise to other changes which helped start the women's rights movement, okay? Now, not that women had not been working the whole time, but remember, I mean, out west especially, they worked right alongside the men, helping to build the homes, working the fields, fighting off Indian attacks, wild animals, whatever. And they were given that right to vote in local elections out in the Montana, the Wyoming territory out in there. But back east, women really had not gone to work outside of the home quite as much. Okay? And women still could not, at this point in time, they still could not vote in national elections, like for the president and things like that, okay? But this is helping to start the women's right movement right here, okay? Then you had the Lowell Mill Girls. One of the first factories in the United States began hiring women was a textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts. By the 1840s, about 75% of the workforce at Lowell's mills were women. About 3 out of every 4 people working there. And these women became known as mill girls or Lowell girls. Okay? Now, the first factory in the United States actually opens up in Rhode Island. Okay? Anybody ever hear of a guy named Samuel Slater?
Heard of it, but don't remember who.
Samuel Slater was a guy from England. Okay, and they had factories in England. Okay, and they would manufacture goods, and they wanted to keep it that way, where they were selling it to the United States. Okay, they didn't want the United States to be able to manufacture their own goods, so it was illegal to share knowledge of these machines that was working in these factories. Okay. Samuel Slater had started working at a factory when he was young, and he wanted to come to the States and open up his own mill. He memorized the working parts of the machines.
That's cool.
Because if they knew he was a mill worker and he was getting on a ship to come to the United States, they very well might check his baggage and stuff to see if he had drawn out pictures or written it in a journal or something of that nature. And of course he would have been arrested because that was a big no-no. So he memorized it. And he comes to the state and he gets a backer money, and they open up a factory on his knowledge. That's pretty cool to remember. I mean, I grant you the machinery was not as complex as what we have today.
But it's still complex.
But still, yeah, that's pretty impressive to me.
If somebody did that today, they would be geek.
Oh yeah, that's pretty impressive that he could do that. Okay? Yes, Leo.
He probably had photographic memory.
So about these factories, so black men were they allowed to vote now?
Do what now?
Were black men allowed to vote in this time?
It depends on the time. We're up into the 1917s.
So
Yeah.
Sorry, I was confused.
Yeah.
Because we were like,
Yeah. The Civil War ended in 1865. It was shortly after that. Well, no, he's right, because the Industrial Revolution kind of stretches out a long period. So he was just. That's what he's asking.
I was confused because we did the immigration stuff.
Yeah, the 1840s. The 1840s, no. In the 1840s, they are not. Okay, but as we get on up to closer to the 1900s, yeah, they are. Okay. Most of the mill girls were daughters of farmers in the Northeast. They took the opportunity to get away from the farm and make some money of their own. Sometimes the girls would take jobs to help out their family or to save money for a future family, because they were single women and they were hoping, you know, of course, one day to get married. So they thought, well, they could put some money back, have a nest egg. Some of them probably sent money back home to their parents to help out. So there was a lot of different reasons that they went to work. Independence, I'm sure, you know, just trying to get off the farm. If you grew up on a farm, I know I grew up on a farm. I couldn't wait to get off the farm. Okay?
Yes.
I couldn't wait. As I got older, I'm like, you know what? It wasn't that bad. It really wasn't that bad.
That's literally what I'm thinking right
The grass is always greener on the other side, as the saying goes. You know, you always want what you don't have.
Wake up.
Okay? The women lived in a large boarding house with hundreds of other women. Okay? There were lots of rules that the girls had to live by. They typically shared a room with several other women. And you got to understand, we're not talking, probably not a room this size by any means. Okay, this is just an old boarding house. It's just a house with bedrooms in it. So but they probably got bunk beds, and they're putting as many as they can in there. So you probably got room to lay your head and have a few personal items. Okay, it's kind of like being in the military. Okay, they give you a place to lay your head and a locker to put your stuff in, and anything else is not yours. Don't use it. Okay. Yep.
If you die during this, what do they do with your stuff? Do they give it back to your
Send it back to your family, probably.
Yeah. I was.
Or if they're breeding up.
I mean, I would like to think that that's what they did.
Yeah, they probably
Okay.
just sold it.
Now, so they typically shared a room with several other women. They had to attend church on Sunday morning.
They
Had to attend church on Sunday morning,
If you want to
and no men were allowed in the boarding house. Okay, no men are allowed in the boarding house. Well, up until the 90s, men, you went on a college campus, and dormitories, boyfriends were not allowed just to go into the various dorms, because they had separate dorms, both men and women. Okay, and that just was not allowed. Okay, that's just some of the rules. Okay. But yeah, how would you? I mean, that's pretty serious. I mean, and like Leo said, some of them might not have been Christians. Most of them, truthfully, at this point in time, most people believed in a higher
I know
power.
you should believe, but it's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but it's your choice. So you shouldn't be forced to do something. Is it? Yes, it is your choice.
It's 1840, dude.
Stupid.
Okay? They were not worried about your feelings.
I'm sorry, my life has changed.
Okay? They were not worried about how you felt about things. If it offended you, you just had to get over it
They
and
weren't
move on.
snowflakes like
Yeah, they didn't get their safe space in their coloring book. Okay?
It's because my hair is blonder than yours.
My guess is most of them actually were believers.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, lower wages and poor working conditions. One reason that the factory owners liked to hire women was because they could pay them less. Okay, and they paid children even less than the women. Okay, at that time, women made about half of what a man made for doing the exact same job. Okay? And for as strange as it sounds, this is why. Back then, people thought that men should make more money because they were providing for their family. They felt that the women that was working in the factories, that was just kind of extra money. Okay, that was extra money. You remember, these are single women, so they're looking after themselves. They're not supporting a child and a spouse. Okay, so that was the way they looked upon it. Okay, so a man would make about twice what a woman made for doing the same job.
And like they're
Okay.
really making, and even the men are now
Okay.
making.
Yeah, well, they're not making. None of them are making. Yeah, none of them are making great big money.
You're
Okay.
making it sound like you get paid.
Yeah. All right. So working condition, and I'm not saying it was right or wrong. I'm just saying it was the times. Again, you can't look back and go, well, that was wrong. It was the times.
And you can't
Okay.
change it no matter what.
You can't judge people from 1840 by 2020 standards. You can't do that. Because one day, what you do as an adult, you don't want people 100 or 200 years from now judging you by their standards on what you were doing. Okay? You don't want that. Because they're going to paint you out possibly to be horrible, horrible people when you weren't. Okay? So you can't do that. You can't judge people in the past by today's standards. You can't do it. Okay? All right. Working conditions in the factories were not great. The women worked very long hours from early morning to late at night. They often worked over 70 hours a week. Okay? They worked 6 days a week. So that's about 12 hours a day probably that they were working. Okay?
I mean, but like,
The
they
fa-
had families, like, I mean, there wasn't really.
Well, yeah. But that's still 12-hour days, 6 days a week. That's long days. The factory rooms were crowded and very loud. And although the women did much of the work, the supervisors, again, was usually men. Okay?
Did you hear someone just scream in the other room?
Now,
I did.
how can you hear them over all your talking?
I heard that. I have good ears.
Well, I'll tell you what, if it's anything that you need to be concerned about, I will be willing to bet someone will let us know.
What is
Okay.
Catawba?
Catawba is a college named after the Catawba Indians. In fact, their mascot is the Catawba Indians. The Civil War took place during the latter part of the Industrial Revolution. With so many men gone to war or killed in battle, new jobs were opening up to women, and even more women was entering the workforce. Think about the same thing happens during World War II. You got a lot of men, millions of men are being drafted in or signing up, joining up to go into the service. Women steps up and starts doing jobs that were thought of as men's work back in these days. I mean, they're building tanks, they're building jeeps, they're building aircraft. They're doing it all, and they're doing a great job. Okay? And then when World War II ends and the men comes back home, the women really don't want to give up that independence that they have earned and prove that they could indeed handle. Okay? Yes?
I forgot the movie we watched. There was a movie and it was about how since all of them were off at World War II, they started a women's baseball league.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that movie.
For entertainment.
Yeah. It's been entertainment
it's called,
because you're. All right. Same way with the WNBA. It's just entertainment. It's not real basketball.
Here comes the snowflake. Just
That's
wait
what
10
I'm saying.
seconds.
All right, here we go. We're going to catch it now.
I was just waiting 10 seconds.
All right, other jobs. Besides, all right, listen. Besides working in textile mills, women begin to work all sorts of jobs, including jobs as teachers, office clerks, nurses, and seamstress. Okay, so they're doing the same job basically that they had been doing at home. The office clerks were a lot of times thought of as men was actually the office clerks back in these days. Teachers, that was one of the first things that women actually did get into was teachers, but a lot of them was indeed men. And of course they were teaching in these little one-room schoolhouses with a room on the back of it usually, and that's where the teacher lived. They had a little bed, had a stove, all the comforts of home. Probably had a chair and a desk, perhaps, but that was about it. Okay, it wasn't well.
Honestly, that
Yeah.
doesn't sound bad.
Yeah.
Wasn't like a man. So they worked 7 days a week, about 12 hours a day.
6 days.
Oh, 6, okay.
Yeah, because they got to go to church on Sunday.
Oh, and I was about to say, how do they work 12 hours? Because church usually ends like 12 or something. So they'd have to work from like 1 to 12 at night.
Yep.
And then 1 to 1 p.m.
They probably started early and went late. Yeah.
70 hours a week, that's pretty much all you do because say 12 hours, wake up,
By the time you
you
eat,
get home and you sleep.
yeah, you
sleep.
eat and you sleep. That was pretty much your life.
Yeah.
Although, listen to this. Now, I'll tell you, the women's rights movement, as women began to work together in large groups, they gained a sense of community. They joined the labor movement to improve working conditions and fought for helped to abolish slavery. They also began to fight for women's rights. Leaders such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed groups to help push for women's rights to vote during the Industrial Revolution. Susan B. Anthony is I think she's the one most people hears about. Okay, she was kind of like the big time leader, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton also was very instrumental in it. It took a long time and a lot of work, but women did finally gain the right to vote. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. So it wasn't until 1920 that women were actually allowed to vote for like the president and senators and congressmen and things like that. Again, some states allowed them to vote in local elections, but not national elections.
So like not
Because they could not. It wasn't allowed. Okay, interesting facts. The Lowell women had their own monthly publication where they contributed articles, poems, and stories. So they got back to their room after working 12-hour days, and some of them would write poems or stories
How did they have enough?
or things of that nature, and then they actually put out their own little paper. Okay. That's pretty cool. Dorothea Dix recruited thousands of women to become nurses during the Civil War. We used to have the mental hospital in Raleigh was named after Miss Dix. Okay. The hospital. Why would? Okay. See, that's just it. You heard Raleigh, so you. Why would you name a city after Dorothea Dix and call it Raleigh? Where? Come on, Leo. Come on, Leo.
He has like 3,000 IQ.
What's wrong with your head?
The first.
He's like Forrest Gump. He has
The
like
first
6
women's right convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York, 1848. When the Lowell factory tried to raise the rent at the boarding house in 1836, the women went on strike, and the factory eventually had to lower their rent back down or they refused to work. Typical wage in the mid-1800s for a woman working at the mill was between $3 and $3.50 a week. Now, remember this. They had to rent their room that they stayed in. They probably bought their goods from the store, the factory store. They ate in the factory cafeteria, if you would. Okay? So that $3.50 a week probably didn't go real far after they gave most of it back to the
I have like
factories. Okay?
Wait, was $3 and
Okay.
Yeah, because